Good morning, class. Welcome again to our session here in Practical Research 2. So today we will be tackling what is the content of your Module 3. Are you ready? Alright, come on, let's go! So in your Module 3, you will have there the kinds of variable and their uses. So let's get to know first. What is really a variable? But before we go further, let's get to know first how far you know the variables in quantitative research. Answer the following questions to the best of your knowledge. Question number 1. It refers to the characteristics that have two or more mutually exclusive values or properties. If your answer is variable, you are correct. Next question. Variables that represent categories that cannot be ordered in any particular way is what you call correct, nominal variable. Question number 3. Special kind of independent variables that are measured in a study because they potentially influence the dependent variable. You guess it right again. It's control. Question 4. Variables that have values that lie along an evenly dispersed range of numbers when there is an absolute zero, as opposed to net worth, which can have a negative debt-to-income ratio level variable. You got it, that's ratio. 5th question. Kind of variable that are not actually measured or observed in a study. They exist, but their influence cannot be directly detected in a study. Confounding is correct. Right. Question number 6. It stands between the independent and dependent variables, and they show the effects of the independent variable on the dependent variable. You got it right. It's intervening or meddling variable. We're nearing to the last 3 questions. Question number 7. Variables that represent categories that can be ordered from greatest to smallest. There you have it. That's ordinal variable. Question number 8. Kind of variable that probably cause, influence, or affect outcomes. They are variably cold treatment, manipulated, antecedent, or predictor variables. They are your cold, independent variables. Question number 9. Variables that depends on independent variables. They are the outcomes or results of the influence of the independent variable. Dependent variable, correct. And finally, the last question. Variables that have values that lie along an evenly dispersed range of numbers is what you called, you got it, interval. So there you have it. I know you have your knowledge, prior knowledge about the variables in your quantitative research. Alright, so the term variable has been mentioned several times, so that it is necessary to define it here. So in research, A variable refers to a characteristics that has two or more mutually exclusive values or properties. That is according to Sevilla and other 1988. Sex, for instance, has two properties, which are maleness and femaleness. The ages of different persons have different values. So with their size, height, weight, and income. The phenomenon of variety is what makes life interesting. It is one of the motivating factors of the research undertaking. A variable specifically refers to characteristics or attribute of an individual or an organization that can be measured or observed and that varies among the people or organization being studied. Creswell, 2002. The types of variables includes continuous variables and discrete variables. Now let's get to know what is a continuous variable. A continuous variable is a variable that can take infinite number on the value that can occur within the population. Its values can be divided into fractions. Take note, the word fractions. Example of this type of variable include age, height, and temperature. Continuous variables can be further categorized as number 1, interval variables. Interval variables have values that lie along an evenly dispersed range of numbers. It is a measurement where the difference between two values does have meaning. Example of interval data include temperature, a person's net worth, just like how much money you have when you subtract your debt from your asset. In temperature, this may illustrate as the difference between a temperature of 60 degrees and 50 degrees. It is the same as difference between 30 degrees and 20 degrees. The interval between values makes sense and can be interpreted. Number 2, ratio variables. Ratio variables has values that lie along an evenly dispersed range of numbers when there is absolute zero. It possesses the properties of interval variable and has a clear definition of zero, indication that there is none of that variable. Example: height, weight, distance. Now, most scores stemming from the response to survey items are ratio level values because they typically cannot go below zero. Temperature measured in degrees Celsius and degrees Fahrenheit is not a ratio variable because zero under these temperature scales does not mean no temperature at all. Now let's go to the second type of variable, which is discrete variables. This kind of variable is also known as categorical or classificatory variable. This is any variable that has limited number of distinct values and which cannot be divided into fractions. This includes sex, blood group, number of children in family. Furthermore, discrete variable may also be categorized into number 1, nominal variable. It represents categories that cannot be ordered in any particular way. It is a variable with no quantitative value. It has two or more categories but does not imply ordering of cases. Common example of this variable include eye color, business type, religion, biological sex, political affiliation, basketball fan affiliation, so on and so forth. Number 2. Ordinal variable. It represents categories that can be ordered from greatest to smallest. This variable has two or more categories which can be ranked. Examples of ordinal variable include educational level, income brackets. An illustration of this is if you ask people if they like listening to music while studying, and they could answer number 1, not very much, 2, much, 3, very much. Then you have an ordinal variable. While you can rank them, we cannot place a value to them. In this type, distances between attributes do not have a meaning. Another example is when you use educational attainment as a variable. On your survey form, you might include there 1. Elementary school graduate, 2. High school graduate, 3. College undergraduate, 4. College graduate, or 5. With master's degree or PhD degree. In this measure, higher number means greater education. Even though we can rank this from lowest to highest, the spacing between the values may not be the same across levels of the variables. The distance between 3 and 4 is not the same with the distance between 1 and 2. Now let's go to the kinds of variables. Several experts have lumped together the following as the major kinds of variables. Number 1, independent variables. Those that probably cause, influence, or affect outcomes. They are invariably called treatment, manipulated, antecedent, or predictor variables. This is the cause variable or the one responsible for the conditions that act on something else to bring about changes. Example: a study is on the relationship of study habits and academic performance of UTNHS senior high school students. Study habits is an independent variable because it influences the outcome or the performance of the students. Dependent variables. Those that depend on the independent variables. They are the outcomes or result of the influence of the independent variable. That is why it is also called outcome variable. Let's take into consideration the same study. A study is on relationship of study habits and academic performance of UTNHS senior high school students. Academic performance is a dependent variable because it is depending on the study habits of the students. If the student changed their study habit, the academic performance also changed. Now let's learn further independent variable and dependent variable. I'll be giving a series of research problems. Now you identify the independent and dependent variable on it. Number 1. How does logical thinking develop critical thinking? Logical thinking is the independent variable, and the critical thinking is the dependent variable. Question number 2. In what way does collaborative learning increase communicative competence? In this question, collaborative learning is the independent variable, while communicative competence is the dependent variable. Last question. To what extent does texting decrease students' grammatical competence? Here, texting is independent variable, while students' grammatical competence is the dependent variable. So those are the examples that can help you determine which is the independent variable and the dependent variable. The next kind of variable is intervening or meddling variables. Variables that stand between the independent and dependent variables are called meddling variables. They show the effects of the independent variable on the dependent variable. Take a look at this example. Even if a farm production is good, if the attitude towards payment is negative, loan repayment would be low. Whereas, if the attitude towards repayment is positive or favorable, loan repayment would be high. Number 4. Control variables. Control variables are special types of independent variables that are measured in the study because they potentially influence the dependent variable. Researchers use statistical procedures to control these variables. They may be demographic or personal variables that needs to be controlled so that the true influence of the independent variable on the dependent variable can be determined. One example of controlled variable is the temperature. If a temperature is held constant during an experiment, it is controlled. Lastly, number 5. Confounding variables. These are variables that are not actually measured or observed in a study. They exist, but their influence cannot be directly detected in a study. Researchers comment on the influence of confounding variables after the study has been completed, because these variables may have operated to explain the relationship between the independent variables and dependent variable, but they were not or could not be easily assessed. Alright, so just a quick recap. Let's try to review again what are those variables that we had just learned. You have there the two kinds of variables. You have your continuous variable and discrete variable. Under continuous variable, you have interval variable or ratio variable. And on the other hand, you have your discrete variable. You have nominal and ordinal. So that is under types of variables. Now let's have a recap about the kinds of variables. Now you have there your independent variable and your intervening variable. You also have your dependent variable, control variable, and of course confounding variable. So there you have it, your variables that need to be considered when you do your quantitative research. An additional knowledge, let's get to know the most common variables in social research. This includes age, sex, gender, education, income, marital status, and occupation. Now, are you ready for your learning activity? You have there 15 items, fill in the blanks type of question. So I hope you can answer it well. Alright, so this has been your teacher, Teacher Dean. I'll see you again next time. Take care and God bless.